Welcome in to the Crash Chords podcast, even though we're not doing a German band, but still, it's foreign enough.
We should have
Hard
learned
enough. Wow.
We should have learned how to say welcome in Iceland.
Have you met us?
This is true.
How do you say welcome in Hochlandic?
I'm not sure, actually.
We'll
I'm
get
sure
some-
we can find out from them. There's probably a decent dictionary on Hochlandic.
I'm sure.
Okay.
Getting right into things, I want to send out a special thanks to Eli August and friends and Painless Parker. Last night at Sidewalk Cafe played a wonderful show, one of the blackout night shows, so it was a very acoustic set, and it was a lot of fun. I had a good time. They did a lot of good stuff. I introduced a good mutual friend of ours, Joe Masella, to the bands, and he really liked them. Painless Parker will be on the 22nd of this month. He's bringing a very special album for us to review as well, and he's going to play some tracks for us as well. In fact, he's working on a new song about the subway system of New York, how much it sucks. Yeah. He even has a verse about Staten Island.
Oh my god.
So we'll see how.
You need
how
to
that goes.
tell me about that.
Wait, there's a subway system
and
on
keep
Staten
me
Island?
informed.
What? He's
I
working
saw
on
a
it
fantasy map, because this is what I do with my spare time. I look up fantasy
instead of working
maps.
on articles for the website.
Exactly. I look up fantasy maps of what certain people would love the New York City subway system to look like if there were ever money and no red tape and no politics.
Oh, there's
and
plenty
no
of money, they
infrastructure
just don't
ground.
use it.
And well, they won't use it for that.
Yeah,
they won't.
that's what I'm saying.
They won't allocate it. Yes, and supposedly Staten Island would be getting. First of all, they're supposed to revitalize the North Shore Railroad. You probably heard that old gag that they've been
that's
doing.
never gonna
They've been doing
happen.
surveys and studies for like 20 years.
Pretty much.
And they would wrap it all the way down Richmond Avenue so that it would pass by the mall and then meet with the main line by Eltingville. For anyone who doesn't live on Staten Island, this is totally irrelevant, but I just thought I'd mention it because I love maps.
What about?
Yes.
Yes, we know you love maps and trains.
I'm trying to visualize.
Wow, John's
that.
at a loss for
I'm vis-
words. Moving
I'm
on.
That's a
visualizing it. That could work.
It could. They would call that...
Now, there's a big problem with revitalizing.
They would call
and
that the
redesigning.
West Line,
No.
and they would call the existing one the Main Line.
There's a real big problem with trying to redesign and revitalize the subway system in New York City, and that is the amount of stuff under
That's why
the
I
ground.
said infrastructure. If there were no infrastructure. In other words, old pipes that have no usage anymore. Steam pipes from like the turn of the century.
That we don't even
And
know is there.
Pneumatic tubes. When there was a pneumatic tube system that would deliver mail from building to building, which they did for about 50 years until they
I'm
finally
still
decided...
waiting for our people pneumatic
bikes
tubes,
were better.
like Futurama says. Oh, I forgot to tell you guys this. So Futurama, the current season that just started, is their last season. But towards the end of this Simpsons season, they're doing a crossover episode with Futurama.
No, towards the beginning of the new season of The Simpsons.
Well,
or the final episodes of Futurama.
I guess it was kind of a matter of time.
Right.
So this is going to be this generation's Flintstones,
Don't meet the
Jetsons.
Jetsons,
Oh,
which
God.
it could be pretty cool, actually.
Oh,
I'm
dear.
kind of excited about
first
it.
of all,
I'll watch it.
Yeah, me too.
Just for the...
Flintstones and
for the hell of
Jetsons
it.
did actually take place in the same world.
We're not getting into that theory again.
Oh, God.
It's not
No.
a theory, it's
Oh,
a
dear.
fact.
It's not a fact. Anyway,
I'll get to our rants.
in all seriousness, Steve
I
had a
have-
special message that he wanted to
Just
give out.
on a bit of a sad note, I want to give out a special shout out to Staff Sgt. Michael Ollis, who was a friend of mine and went to my school, Michael J. Petriti School in Staten Island, between second grade and graduation. It was a K-12 school, and that's how long both of us went there. We were there when the school first opened, and we were in the ROTC program together, and he was just a great guy. He always wanted to be in the Army. He always wanted to serve his country, just like his father did, and I'm sorry to announce that he was killed in Afghanistan just last week. It's very sad news, and there will be a candlelight vigil on Wednesday at 8:30 in Great Kills Park for anyone who wants to attend. My sympathies to the family.
Our
And
hearts go out to the family and friends, and it's a shame, but
It still happens.
yeah,
It still happens. The war,
That's why I
the
don't
war
even-
goes on.
yeah.
No politics, though. No
yeah,
politics.
let's not get into any of that. Nor are we getting into twerking and Miley Cyrus, because honestly, you already read every opinion on it.
What a transition. Ouch. Ouch.
Well, one thing bears mentioning, and Matt brought this up right before the podcast. Macklemore and Ryan Lewis.
Oh yeah, this was neat. So, MTV apparently wanted them to perform Thrift Shop because, they're all about stupid fun because they're MTV and there's no intelligence left.
And I love Thrift Shop.
And Macklemore and Ryan Lewis refused to do that song because Same Love is their hit and it's an influential song. They said, we're doing the song where we walk. And they did the song. So I give them a lot of credit for that because a lot of people don't stand up to MTV and get what they want. And they did.
But the reason they can stand up to them is because they have no fear. Because what's MTV going to do? Not play their videos? Oh. What are they going to do? Get them fired from the label company? Oh.
Yeah.
No, these guys being independent, having their own everything, gives them a lot of power. And it's refreshing to see not just a band or a group that is on their own and succeeding in this business, but being able to actually take something back from the corporations and to be able to stand up to them. So,
more importantly
them.
than that, it's nice to see someone who just cares about music and message that much. Because not everybody does.
Yeah.
I'm not even that big of an anti-corporation guy, but when it comes to the music industry, I feel like they really embody the idea that, it is all about the money and not about the art. So if there's a time to be self-righteous and stand up, it's probably this, because musicians need to eat,
Yeah.
It's nice to eat. I like it.
I'm a fan of eating as well.
Food, yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
All right, moving into our album pick this week. This is Steve's pick, and in his continued fashion of picking things we can't see coming out of left field,
Sigur Rós, as far as I can pronounce, is an Icelandic post-rock band. They've been around for a few years.
Now,
probably
Steve,
about a decade.
What's post-rock?
Oh, dear. I guess I'll have to explain that. Post-rock can seem like kind of a vague term at first, like many other qualifiers, like prog rock, like neo-rock, neo-prog rock. Progcore, alternative, indie, or independent, which doesn't even mean that anymore. It's all silly things, right? Well, there is a meaning behind it, and post-rock was born out of plain old rock and roll, as it was classic rock and all that, but it uses a bit more varied instrumentation, specifically in the guitars. It uses the guitar as facilitators of timbre and texture. This is the wiki quote here, and it's as good a quote as any. Not traditionally in the way that you would expect rock instruments to use their guitars, which is, for rocking out and shredding and masturbating on stage, all that stuff. No, this is not a part of post-rock. This is using it as a setting setter, as I think I said a few weeks ago.
Setting setter, yeah, that's a little redundant, but actually kind of accurate.
Yeah, kind of redundant.
So, and then, what's the name of the album we're doing by Sigur Rós?
As best as I can pronounce.
Yes.
Kveikur.
Kveikur. Kveikur.
It means candlestick, fuse,
or primer.
We will be actually using more likely the English translations of a lot of these titles just because they are hard to pronounce for me personally in English. I have enough trouble with English words.
So this was Steve's pick, and they're an Icelandic post-rock band. We're going to see throughout the course of the album a lot of similarities to alternative, industrial, rock.
And that's actually kind of an interesting thing for Sigur Rós, because what I know of them as a band introduced me back in college. They were a lot mellower, I think, in the old days. They were more in the vein of ambient. They used the same thing I said about the guitars to achieve an ambient end, which was usually very mellow. And there's even a joke, you can actually find it on the Crash Chords Facebook page that Mary Bradley posted, that it's the type of music that girls just love to make out to. Yeah. That's their older stuff, and I don't see that too much in this album.
Yeah, it's
heavier.
This was much heavier and much more melodic. There were even a lot of, even some of the there were a couple songs that kind of had very creepy melodies, too, that kind of went weird ways that I wasn't expecting at all. I mean, I didn't really have a great expectation for what to hear, because I'd only heard a few songs by them.
Yeah, let's just say, if you try to make out to this, you could be thrown. You could be thrown.
Or you might hurt your tongue.
Unless you like it like that.
I don't know, you get a little twisted.
Yeah. Something about that Icelandic moaning, though. Yeah, that's what does it.
So we'll get into track one. Track one is the one of two singles on the record. And it's pronounced
Brennenstein.
Which
Or
means
Stein.
brimstone.
As in fire and brimstone, which I never hear out of the context of fire and brimstone. I never do. People just talk about brimstone.
This song doesn't really have a fire and brimstone cliche feel at
No,
all.
not really. I will say, well, in the intro at least, there is that intro. It's very gripping, and it's got that deep rumble in the bass. That's probably the lowest decibel we've heard in any album we've reviewed.
And it's a good, strong intro track. It feels like it's setting up something. I mean, it doesn't give an overall... It's not an overture. It doesn't give an overall sense of what's to come. Not really at all. But for just a strong intro track to what this band does, it's fairly accurate.
As far as Brimstone goes, I think this title is a great jumping point on actually how the song feels. The first half... There's a really amazing discording beat in it, produced by some synth work on top of very... Plotting's the wrong word, but it's really kind of appropriate.
You know, I could see how people would use the term plotting to describe a lot of the vocals.
Not vocals, drums.
Oh, drums particularly.
Drums.
Okay,
the drums were very methodical, very safe and straightforward, but that really discorded... synth work it was deep, it was gravelly, it was brimstone. Brimstone brings to mind volcanoes. We're talking Iceland here, all right? They got those.
Volcanoes.
Because I didn't know
what was that about.
I didn't know volcanoes.
I didn't know
like Tainos.
Shh,
the Taino Indians. They had volcanoes.
I'm gonna stab you. I didn't know what word I was going to say until I actually said it. No, it's got that apprehension, that build-up kind of a feeling going for it.
One thing I'll say right off the bat is, one thing I like about listening to bands where I don't know the native language of what's being sung is that the lyrics become much more just an instrument and less... It influences me less by what they're saying. It's, again, how they're saying it, like what we were talking about Justin Furstenfield last week. But this is more so because we don't even know what they're saying. And the singing, I mean, the singer has a beautiful... He's what's the type of singing? He's
a falsetto.
Falsetto, that's the word I was looking for. He has a beautiful falsetto, and you kind of notice it right away as soon as he starts singing.
When I first heard the band many years ago, I thought that it was a girl for the longest time. Which is like, alright, on one hand, it's like... That could add to it. The fact that it shows the sensitivity of the male.
And in this first track, me and John, it reminded us much more of their older stuff, but Abandoned Pools. It had a similar style, his singing, to Abandoned Pools' older work. Not so much the album we reviewed as much as the older stuff.
And I do sense that.
Yeah, it has that, because they both have those great falsettos.
I could at least see that when it comes to this album, because there's a stronger band around it. It's not that older Sigur Rós didn't have a stronger band, but it's just that they would purposely be very mellow and thin to allow, I guess, that falsetto to be more of a standalone player. Mm-hmm. And in this case, it's not that that's reduced necessarily, it's just that you have more to focus on.
The mix was very good, too.
Yeah.
A lot of bands like this, you could lose a lot in the mix, and this one, you don't really get a sense of that, at least by the first track. It's a very nice mix of everything. It kind of works really well together.
I found the guitar, the very light strum-style guitar, to really complement and to speak to what Steven was saying. It was accenting his vocals. It was keeping it together with that deep rumble that we were experiencing.
And with the guitar, that's a quintessential element of post-rock right there. The very light, tinny, it's not meant to show off. It's really just to help in the ambient build. At the same time, this track isn't as ambient, like I said, as most of their previous work. If you're looking for an ambient album, this probably isn't going to cut it for you. But it is gripping. It's gripping in a very, very different sense. It's a tough thing to describe, but I will go out and say that it has kind of a depressing air to it.
A little bit. It's depressing,
heavier depressing, with like a smack of anger to it.
Yeah, but it's also kind of got that... It's depression on an upturn. It doesn't feel like it's hopelessness.
No,
like
not at all.
There's definitely a sense of hope within it.
And I feel that particularly in the melody. There's like this moment in this track, which is actually, I think, kind of defines it for me, where he sort of bends his vocals, down and up. It's like this nice little parabolic shift, and it provides a lot of character for this intro, I think.
It's just when it slowed down, it wasn't bad. The next track, which we're going to get into in a minute, I think did a much better mix going between A to B than this track did. It wasn't bad, but the next track gets much better.
Yeah, there was an apprehension building in the first part of this track, but it turned very dramatic in the second part. It really was releasing, it wasn't culminating.
Yeah.
That's the part that I think I was calling depressing in a sense. It's a little bit eerier.
It
invokes
brought the
other
bass
things.
out. It brought the bass out big time.
Well, that's the transition from the first half to the second half. Is it brings that bass out, which becomes coupled with this synth effect that gives it that really deep decibel feel, but it kind of flutters. And because it flutters, it almost sounds like if you'd placed a microphone, at the front of like a jetliner. Like, all you hear is just a whoosh of air rushing in, that where you can't even make heads or tails of anything anymore. It's just this whirring sound.
But that was also coupled with, on the flip side, a very high percussion, very frantic percussion work, which was that dramatic feeling I was getting in the song. It did not work as well for me as the A section did, but it was really interesting the way they keep pairing up these very different elements together.
Yeah, and the different elements that come in the second section, first of all, is the string backdrop. That's very important in perpetuating the composition of this ambient sound that they're building, because it sort of takes the role that the guitars had previously had in the first section. And then it really shifts gears by moving into a solemn outro, where there's a solo trumpet you can hear, where that's the most prominent effect, and very light synth backdrop at the end. So it really does take a dive in terms of tone. Not in terms of quality.
No,
but
it's just I didn't feel, after especially hearing the second track, I didn't feel the transition was as strong in the first track. It's not bad, but it wasn't as strong as it is in the second track. I think the second
I was
track,
still on board with the transition. I still consider this to be a very strong intro.
the last thing I want to say about this track is it
adds dissonance, which I think is present throughout the rest of the album.
It's a good way of explaining it.
But this track also, in composition, doesn't feel like a single. The second single that we'll get into later feels like a single. This one really doesn't.
It's the first and the third track on this album that are the two singles, and I never would have known it if I didn't look it up.
Well, there is one argument to be made that this would have been a good single because of, as you explained before, this is a very different take on what they normally do.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's almost an explanation instead of a single.
Yeah, if you're releasing it as the first single, especially, it'll tell people here's what our new sound sounds like.
It's the intro, and it's showing it 6 months early.
It's an introduction to the album and to their sound. That's actually not a bad idea.
There you go. So we'll get to the second single in a minute, but first the second track.
So the second track is
Hraftina.
This one I'm going to spell out. It's Hrafntinna.
Hopefully you'll be looking along.
Which means obsidian. So we're actually propagating this fiery theme, because if anybody knows anything about geology, that's one of the ways you make obsidian, a lot of heat.
Yeah.
Well known for that.
Very interesting. And yet, the intro almost doesn't quite match that to me.
No.
It's very airy wind chime intro. Doesn't seem to, I think kind of a cool sensation, not necessarily heat.
Well, that's the whole thing. Obsidian's rock. It is the leftovers from intensity.
It takes great heat and then quick cooling.
I see what you get.
So actually, that fits it kind of perfectly.
It was very steady and methodical in its composition and in its lower register beat work. But it was that fractured high chimes that really brought to the forefront the idea of obsidian to me. The idea of fractured, broken, just little edges here and there. And I love the way that chime really gave that edge work.
I agree, and that presents the backdrop really perfectly. And then there's another element added, which I think is the core of this track, and maybe even the core of this album whenever it returns, and that is the brass section. It starts building in the beginning of this track, almost menacingly, but it provides this very open air sensation. Like when you just hear, steady brass, you almost think like the rocks of Scotland or something. Well, actually, why go to Scotland? Why not go to Iceland? Iceland is a pretty rocky place. I feel the landscape there. I feel the geologic nature. Iceland is a very geologic place. There's a lot going on there. There's a lot of activity going on underground. That's actually where they get most of their power. And yet, I see the landscape. If anyone has ever seen a picture of Iceland, you do get kind of a lonely sensation. First of all, just because of the location of the place, it's in the middle of the Atlantic, and you should get sort of a cool sensation, countered by the geothermal heat from under the ground. It's really a remarkable place. There's nothing quite like it in the world, and I sort of felt that landscape in this. And the brass is responsible, I think, for bringing that to the table. It provides this nice open-air sensation, because it's not belting the brass. It's not, shouting a quintet like in many other cases where you hear brass music. It just kind of smooths out.
It adds to the
nice
ambience
tone
of the track, yeah.
Yeah. It's not percussive brass.
Yeah.
And that's a great point. I love that. It was a really good explanation for the brass section. And you're right, it really does a great job of airing out the rest of the instruments. But at the same time, I did have some issues in this track, and it was specifically some of the more sporadic elements they were adding to this song was kind of pulling me out of this airy nature. It was a short little burst of synth notes that were really, it was breaking up the song, and these musical tones I felt didn't add anything to the song itself.
I agree. Now, when it comes to the sections of these tracks, I almost hesitated to consider this the kind of track where it's actually like a verse A, chorus. It's really more of an A-B-C-D kind of structure to me.
I mean, a lot of this album didn't really have a clear verse-chorus structure.
In fact, there was a round, there was a lot of A-Bs, there was a lot of A-B, A, D, F, C.
Yeah, there was a lot of...
A little bit, but these aren't as much songs in the traditional sense as pieces.
They were a lot more closer to pieces.
Yeah. Well, because after all, we're taking the lyrics here and melody simply as a melody. We're taking it simply as another instrument.
So it feels more like a piece.
Especially because of the way he sings. He doesn't sing in a very personalized manner. He sings as if
it's very instrumental.
You could just line up a bunch of instruments and then just drop his face one in between the lineup.
It's much like the actual brass section. It is open, it is airy, it is long.
Yes, that's a perfect comparison. I think that's probably what he was trying to echo with that brass section. The thing about these sections, though, is it is easy to sort of get lost in the transitions. Now, this is one of my favorite tracks in this album, but I want to play devil's advocate here and propose that certain transitions can sometimes seem a little bit abrupt. Sometimes it's one section may not feel as flushed out as the second section, or vice versa. There's a little bit of clutter here, but at the same time it sounds thin, and I know that's kind of contradicting myself, but these sections seem to contradict themselves.
Yeah, I mean, but also for the style of this album and this band, for the sense I'm getting of it, this seems to make sense in the context of post-rock.
It does. It definitely does. And to be honest, I think
to make it more forgiving.
The ambiguity that I was feeling in this track, I think, was very much intentional.
I think you were supposed to feel very ambiguous listening to this.
As a whole, that's the funny thing, is that this track, I feel like you're only the second track in the album, and yet I feel like you were dropped into the middle of an epic. Like, the climax of an epic. A very important section. And yet, it's almost a little bit early for me to accept that.
Right.
Like, there needed to be more build-up.
I will say that there is a full theme in this album, which I'm not going to reveal yet, but there is a reason. No, not to you, because I want to talk about it a little bit later when it really struck me. But there's a reason for it. I think that Brimstone is the setting, and Obsidian is more of the storyline.
Okay, I buy that. I mean,
I can see that.
If you can imagine a storyline which already has somewhat of the stage set for you, you are already aware that there's a bit of a depressing vibe, in your main characters. There's already a cloud hanging over their heads. Then I think it does make sense in context.
Almost a desolate nature.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's definitely a lot of loneliness to this track. A lot of that is complemented by the string melodies that are brought in what I would call the section C or D. It's a little bit hard to place.
But it's a different kind of loneliness. It's not a loneliness like alone loneliness. It's loneliness in a crowded room, I feel like. It's an inner feeling of loneliness.
Maybe just because there's a lot of stuff going on in this
But
track.
that's what I'm saying, yeah. So it kind of feels like you feel alone even with others around you. It's kind of an internalized loneliness.
And we do have to talk about...
abstract approach to this, but...
There's one big thing we have to talk about in this track. Forgetting all this loneliness theme work, the outro.
Yeah, I was just getting to the outro.
Oh, boy.
Okay, this is one of the best outros on the album, and
Yes.
it does bookend this track quite well when you consider the wind chime intro and this very cold outro. It almost seems like we've taken a dive. This is the rising action, but yet stuff is getting more tense.
Yeah. Almost as if ice is breaking under you and you sink into the cold.
Exactly, and it almost feels like you're about to remain here for quite some time.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily true considering the tracks that follow, but at least at this moment, I was really digging the setting, as it were. It's a solemn brass quartet. More solemn than we get at the end of Brennenstein. This is almost like a funeral. This is like a military tribunal kind of...
Yeah. Like, you picture someone talking over an audience of mourners, saluting somebody.
And I do have to say that, emotionally speaking, considering what I said at the beginning of the podcast,
You thought of that.
It was echoed in this track, in
Absolutely.
this section particularly.
Right, and that...
It's moving.
Yeah, and also,
It's inherently moving.
A lot of music also can be what's on your mind. You'll find somewhere to put it in what you're listening to.
And that's a universal thing, I think, also, at least between the brass and the connection that we associate to military. I mean, the horn has been used for thousands and thousands of years in armies.
Yeah,
so,
bugles.
Yeah.
For sure.
Either to rouse or to lament.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting to a more positive sounding tone, we have track 3, which is pronounced...
Isyaki.
Which is iceberg.
And this was the second...
Sure Iceland is no stranger to.
They have knowledge on it, I would assume.
This song is the other single from the album. And this one is a very standard pop track, very catchy. It's the only one that really has a verse-chorus kind of feel.
But at that same time...
I would challenge that.
Yeah.
This is not really a verse-chorus kind of feel. This is what John was mentioning before, that, we have a lot of types of form structures in this album, and he mentioned round. This is the round track.
Yeah,
it's really one section that repeats itself, but with varied instrumentation around it.
The reason you're latching on to that formula, that pop, is going to be in the vocals. The high register vocals we're working with here. The high synthesized flutes.
To some extent, we'll go with it.
And the strings really do come back and very reminiscent of early J-pop, to be honest. They have that sort of feel, that sort of tone that I recognize from J-pop.
Well, me and Steve both said that this song was also very reminiscent of stuff we've heard by Phoenix, which is a French band, right? Yeah, French.
Yes.
Well, you got to remember, you got this big high register contrasting beautifully, in my opinion, with the percussions, the deep synth beat, and the bass. I mean, it was an incredible contrast.
It does it contrasts, and yet I mentioned that the melody feels like it fits like a glove.
It does. Like, I couldn't imagine it being... Like, it was almost predictable, but not in a bad way. Like, that's what you expected.
It's a round.
Yeah.
It is predictable.
Well, yeah, that's true.
It's supposed to sort of bring in the audience.
But it's predictable not in a bad way, because you're doing this kind of round to draw people in.
Exactly.
And it works really well.
Why rounds exist.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to alienate people.
And this is where I saw a little discussion that me and Steve got into it about the idea of a mathematical approach to music and a scientific approach, or a more artistic approach. And to sum it up, this is what I came up with. When you talk about other genres such as jazz, the perfect example, it's a culinary experience. There's a dash of this, there's a dollop of that. It throws elements in there. They might have thought it through, but it's a very flavorful variety you're working with here. This album is more of a chemistry set. You're trying to make something, And these guys are master chemists. They really know how to combine tones together. I mean, they really know what would work. They know when to bring those violins in. It's less of feeling and more of just the mathematical knowing of it.
And I was a bit on the fringe with this topic that he's bringing up, because on one hand I feel like it's true, but yet another part of me feels like it's very split between these tracks. Some tracks do feel that way, and yet other tracks do feel very artistic. To be honest, I'm going to stick with track 2, Obsidian, on the artistic side. I think that fulfilled that very much for me, at least. I saw the culinary work at play, not the chemistry. And yet, in this track, I guess you could almost be on the fringe between both of them, because, yes, it is a pop track. It is a single. It's pop for post-rock, which
right.
I mean, it's probably my favorite kind of pop if I'm going to pick a pop track.
Right, but it has those influences that you can't deny. The pop is there.
Exactly. But you could go either way with that whole, chemistry or culinary kind of thing. It's artistic in its effort to reach out to people, but also to introduce something new, because it's not something everyone might hear every day, but it's sure got something that you can latch onto, something that everyone will recognize.
This whole album is very engaging, and I mean there are even quite a few standout moments that just kind of jar you. I mean, even in the next track,
I won't say the whole album is engaging. There are holes.
No, of course.
Yeah.
Even though I brought there's a few here that even I am just like, this is the tendency, I think. Even starting with track 1, you could tell, as I said before, they're bringing in a much heavier sound. And the problem with that heavier sound is, it uses a lot of synths, a lot of strings, and they seem to want to, smash so many instruments together at once that it can sound a little bit cluttered, which bleeds the ambient effect into noise rock.
Yeah. And
noise rock, for better or worse, it can fulfill the same ambient touch. It can also hurt it. It can also hurt it by leaving you in a sea of anonymity. You don't know where you are. You don't know who you are.
Right.
It's just something I would pose, but that's only in places in this album. And Isiaki is. It's almost silly to mention this now because Isiaki is a very straightforward track. There's nothing ambiguous here.
Going into track 4, though, which is.
Can I try this one?
Sure, go for it.
Yfirborth.
I'll go with it.
Yeah, sure, why not?
Which means surface. Now this is, the first 3 tracks were almost 8 minutes, more than 6 minutes, more than 5 minutes. This one's actually one of the shorter tracks on the album.
Not the shortest, though.
Not the shortest, but 4.5 minutes. This is much clearer cut.
It was a lot more to the point.
This one progresses, because of its shorter frame, it progresses a little more quickly than what we'd been experiencing. Because of that, and also because of the introduction, which really felt like a love song, if I were to compare it to anything. I really did not know how this song felt in the scheme they were creating.
Yeah, I started to lose track of flow of theme here. The theme was getting difficult to follow at this point for me.
I accept that with theme. At the same time, it's called Surface, so maybe it's supposed to be a little bit less... Well, I think it's supposed to be less ambiguous. But to be less ambiguous would imply that you have to have a more specific theme.
Yeah.
So... I'm defensive of this musically, to be honest.
It does have a nice settling nature.
I have no issue with the track. I just thought... By name alone, I didn't really understand the connection. But I mean, all of the tracks on this record feel fairly connected within what they're trying to accomplish.
I agree, and just consider the placement of it. I mean, we're following Isiaki here, which is more of an anthem than anything, at least in terms of the round structure that they use. It's supposed to rouse people, bring people together. I feel like this is a very easy song to sing along to.
Yeah.
It's almost not a build-up, it's just up.
Yeah.
The entire time, but composed marvelously between each and every round and what they use. This is a bit of a cool down, yes, but I still feel like you needed a cool down at this moment. I don't know. Maybe I just was zoned out to it. I was engaged in this track for some reason. At times the melody would feel a little bit muddy. I agree with that.
Yeah.
But it does experiment with the backdrop, and it's a very sad track, to be honest.
It is.
I think that's where I related to it most.
You got very much this sense of sadness,
That desolation we had earlier wasn't back in full force, but it's peeking her head.
And this does have a great build-up in the middle of the track here. Even though the track is short, it has a great build-up section, yeah.
The surface gets broken.
Yeah.
To be punny.
But for me, the thing that really stood out about this track was the last 5 seconds. This creepy outro.
Oh, brother.
So the thing about this outro...
Okay, can I do it?
Wait. The thing about an outro like this, and it's very common in a lot of rock music, is it's almost sounds like reversed audio, and it's also distorted audio in another language. So when you do that and twist language that way, it sounds very creepy.
Slowing down also.
Yeah, and there was a speed change.
I think that's really...
It was on the most basic of levels, it was sort of kind of almost like this. And that's it.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, no.
It went up and down a bit.
Disregard John.
If I had
that's usually a rule for life.
An auto-tuner built into my throat, I might be able to do something like that.
But yeah, it was just
weird.
Like, listen to this track when I was driving home today. It was like, on the way to the podcast, it's like, oh, this song, it's not bad. I kind of like this. What the hell?
You know, it's jarring enough that you really... It's hard to pass up that soundbite without wondering if there is a meaning to it. Without begging there to be a meaning to it.
There is a meaning to it.
This is a case where we probably should have looked up the lyrics.
No.
I think
the
this
lyrics.
is a case
There's a meaning
where
the use of it.
What is that?
The next song.
Well... Alright, I'll let you take this, because I'm not sure I would buy that offhand, I guess. But you know what? State your case.
Track 5 is Stormer.
Stormer.
It's spelled like my last name
Storm
with UR at the end.
And it just so happens to mean storm.
Shocking.
This was...
another pop-sounding track.
Yes and no. I did like the work of changing up the percussion. Tom-toms, drums, and if I'm not mistaken, a little bit of chime work built into there. It was nice having a little bit of everything on the percussive side. It had great layering of these ethereal, drawn-out string work that contrasted well with this percussion work. It really did represent to me, a conflict.
I don't buy it.
Okay.
No, I don't buy it. I've thought about this track several times over, and I just don't... I'm not a fan of it. This was a pop track, yes, but without the character of Isiaki.
Well, yeah.
If there were two pop sounding tracks on this album, I would just say those two, Isiaki and Stormer.
And that's where my nitpicking starts too. Yeah, it was extremely predictable.
And I think for that reason, this is why typically the two pop tracks are the ones that you make singles. Yeah. And in this case, it was one pop track, which is a good pop track, a creative pop track, alongside a showcase of their newer, more thoughtful material, which is Brennenstein, the first track. Yeah. This doesn't fit into either category.
For this band and for this type of an album, it felt very formulaic.
It was a letdown,
and
to
generic.
Be honest. They tried really hard with this.
Look, this is the reason why I don't buy that case of yours, where where the last track fits in context.
I'm saying it was a conceptual idea that I don't think worked. That's the big part. It did not work because of the way this form was. This song was structured. I called every breakdown 5 seconds before it was happening. I called every tonal change right before it happened. It was very, very predictable.
Yeah, I did as well. And, it's also a little bit repetitive. Yeah, some people might consider it a nice beat, I guess. There's sort of this little chime that just kind of repeats this ding, 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 ding. Goes over and over and over again. It kind of is the theme of the song. This is like, there's many other tracks on this album, but it gets grating for me.
Yeah, me too. It just got tired and repetitive. And I'm sorry, but with a band like this, when it was in the round, like Isiaki, that kind of repetition I like. But a repetition like this, when they're doing so much with the other tracks, it just seems boring.
It's prominent enough in that track that they're using that as the hook. And the fact is, we've had 4 tracks so far prior to that.
This is the halfway mark on the album.
All had very creative hooks to them. Yeah. Each one of these 4 tracks had something. Even if it's a little bit ambiguous in Year for Both, I did find it. I felt the hook there. But also because that was a sadder track, I didn't need as much of a hook. It was more of an introspective
This
track.
song for the
this is why I don't buy where track 5 stands. Because you're going from introspective right back to the top, right back to this very carefree sound. It's like I wanted to be immersed in this world.
This pulled me out of the immersion.
Yeah,
it pulled me out of the immersion of the album, absolutely. I agree with that completely. I just think that they could have done so much. Considering what they'd already showed me in 4 tracks, this 5th track just was kind of a letdown comparatively. I liked it initially when I first heard it, but upon a second listen, it just didn't hold up to what I thought it was the first time around.
And you know what? I was on the fringe the first time around, and you said you enjoyed it, but the outro for this track, for Stormer, it's got that... It's a trope. I'm going to come out and say it. It's a trope. The piano, the sort of cheapish piano and upright or spin it made to sound as if it's in the empty auditorium. I feel like we come across this all the time.
Especially doing ambient-ish albums.
Exactly, ambient-ish, yeah. Or even post-rock borrows, alternative borrows. Everyone loves to borrow this, to the point where even regular pop music is borrowing it. Because people hear that, and it just seems to spark something in them. Or at least it did when it was new, when it was... kind of a fresh and bold idea.
I think it can still now, but it depends on what it's paired with.
Well, that's the thing. I still think it was nice touch. It's probably one of the only things I could say that really did grab me in Stormer, but it is a cheap shot. Let's face it. It was a courtesy.
And if we're going to call out other pop music for worst tropes, we should also call this out, you know? It's just... It was there. I mean, you're right.
Because I had been a little bored up until this point in this particular track, and then
it was just
I'm followed boredom of, repeating injury with insult, a little bit
it was just like a meh. But then we got kind of a different... We got a different take on this, was... The next track, track 6, which
title
is
track.
The title track, Kveikur.
Yeah, interesting thing here. That little U, because I had been saying Kveikur, up until now, and then I looked it up, is trying to understand the pronunciation, the IPA and all that, and the U should sound as if it's like ooh, but it's weird when you have that R at the end, so it's like oor. So Kveikur. Kveikur, sorry, Kvei.
Once again, this on Wikipedia was specifically defined as Candlewick. It's that Candlewick fuse imagery.
Yeah.
6-minute song, back up to the long stuff. It was a reintroduction of the industrial tone that was first introduced in Brimstone.
Yeah, you got a sense of that here. It even reminded me of some of the more industrial-sounding Nine Inch Nails songs I've heard in the past.
Right.
It kind of had this kind of more aggressive feel, almost.
Exactly. So, we're kind of back to Brimstone here. It's menacing, in a way, which industrial loves using, because there is kind of a menacing nature to industrial music.
Right, and the idea that this is Candlewick and making it imposing is, I think, the idea of holding a candle barely burning in the darkness. That's where the ominousness comes from.
Well, it was that heavy distortion with the bass and the guitar. That it was that same sort of heavy, and I have to say the guitar and the bass actually were a little more clear cut instrumentally than they were in Brimstone, and I think that kind of detracted it for me. It didn't have that mystique anymore, that shrouded nature with these very familiar instruments.
I think you hit the nail on the head, and that was my problem with this track. It definitely beat Stormer, I suppose, in terms of complexity. It brings back a lot of that other stuff, but it brings back a lot of that other stuff. It doesn't really add much more.
We don't need more of the same, especially for us when we don't understand the lyrics.
This is where I enter that problem when I was playing Devil's Advocate earlier, and that's the introduction of noise rock. It can be appealing in a certain setting, but you need to be prepared to sit in that setting for a while.
Yeah.
You can't get bored, you can't break it.
And this track was no slouch either. It lasted a while, and it was just one of those things where, especially for a title track, you expect a little more, and for it to break the mold again.
Well, it was... Okay, you have the guitar and the bass significantly more prominent than you normally do. You have those really deep, heavy drums they've been using throughout most of the album, with the very high chimes. And it was this, that, and the other thing again, but they just tried so fast, so hard, so much, you couldn't pick out anything. And
I
that
won't go.
brought it
I won't go that far, but yes, it is a little bit cluttered. I don't want to detract from it too hard though, because I still think this is a fairly well put
It's still
together
a good track. It's just
it's more just about the experience of it as in its place on the album. I think alone we wouldn't be talking about any of this stuff.
no,
if
for
we
sure
had
not.
heard it.
But at this point in the album, like I almost would have liked this to be more towards the end. Then maybe I would have been a little more forgiving. But I still felt it was too soon to hear these same themes again.
Perhaps, but at the same time, there's a much bigger shift coming in the track to follow, because I think that's where the... Well, actually, I'll hold off for a little bit. I'm going to call it Kveikur. I'm just going to say that it's soundscaping at its best and at its worst simultaneously. Because soundscaping can really turn a lot of people off. Soundscaping isn't about hook at all, necessarily.
No, it's about setting a scene.
Exactly.
Setting a setting.
Setting. But the funny thing is that we've already had our setting.
Well,
set.
Yeah.
Our setting has been set. How can you set it again?
Yeah, I think that's why it felt so redundant, is because it was
Yeah.
trying to go, hey, let's set another scene, but we're setting the same scene. So why are we setting it again? Whereas,
yes and no. It wasn't as oblique, so you could say that this is more of a focusing on what the scene work was before. You can make that sort of an argument. I'm not going to make it too fervently because it's not the best of arguments, but
and
it is
it's a stretch. It's a stretch, though.
A little bit of a stretch.
But
But
then
there is one thing that I thoroughly loved that a lot of these songs have done. I love the ending of it. Once again, the outro.
I agree.
They do some really great outros.
I was just about to mention
It
that.
was
The
almost
chorus,
thunder.
it devolves into the... thunder is one way to put it. I sort of felt like it was coming back from below ground again. I felt like this beast from beneath kind
Was
of effect
bursting
to
through
it.
the surface.
Yeah,
Say
it was a growl.
That volcanic idea and brimstone's breaking through once more.
Exactly.
There
Yeah,
you
that
go.
could be it. I mean, and that's actually kind of a good way to put it.
Kind of like some theme is starting to show up in this album.
Don't be
I mean-
so smug.
Well, let's face it. Whenever we choose to do foreign music that has lyrics we can understand, which this may be the first case.
We haven't done a full album until
Because
now,
the last
yeah.
foreign, quote-unquote, foreign music that we took was Him, which was all in English. and
Right,
actually very
right. But I mean,
beautiful.
I've mentioned Rammstein on the podcast before and done a few articles on them, and
we-
Psy as
we
well.
Talked, we talked, yeah, about
We've talked about Psy.
Yeah, but these
and
are
so-
all very, fertile. These are the things that, make it to the big leagues and everything. Well,
Right.
not that Sigur Rós is very popular.
And I haven't
and they do
watched it,
amazing concerts, I've heard. The other thing about Sigur Rós is their manner of performance. So it makes me think that a lot of these soundscaping tracks would
do better in a live
do
setting.
much better on a live setting, I think. For one thing, when I mentioned that post-rock tends to use, alternative forms of guitar work in order to achieve that setting, one thing that Sigur Rós is known for doing is using a bow against their guitar.
Which
I've seen that before, and that's
Before-
kind of awesome.
It is.
Before I even listened to the album, I was on
It's
YouTube.
screechy though. 'cause it's not-
I gotta say, I was on YouTube. First thing I saw was a live concert. They opened up. He's there playing, and I was just like,
Playing the guitar like a cello, right?
well, no, he was holding it like a guitar with the long.
Oh, yeah,
it had to be a
that's
2.5, 3 foot longer than normal bow. It was ginormous. It was almost, if not bigger than a cello bow.
It probably had to be kind of a strong bow, because you consider that guitar, all the strings are not arched. In other
Yeah.
words, you can't play. I mean, unless you're playing the lowest string or the highest string, you can't play one at a time. If you're trying to get the middle strings, you're going to be playing them all at once. They're going
The
to be
bow
blurring.
was curved.
The bow was curved. Right?
It looked like it had a slight curve in it.
Interesting.
Interesting.
That's just something I thought I'd mention because
What's
You know,
but that
it's about
actually
the- it's
leads
the
me to
soundscaping.
something that we're not going to get into now, but that I may want to talk about on a future podcast, because this has come up before. Bands that sound great on CD, but even better live because of the experience, the energy, and the
Well, there's
style.
even bands I know of that actually stink by comparison to their live shows
Yeah.
on CD.
yeah,
Because CDs can't... Like, I was talking to Eli August the other night about this. His band's live performance is so engaging and so endearing that on CD you just don't get that same sense of emotion. It's there, but not as palpable as a live performance.
well, this is one of the reasons I threw a question in my interview of Godsticks a few weeks back, whether they preferred, meticulousness over improvisation or
Yeah.
whatnot, because there's something, when you're in the studio, a lot of it is very meticulous work. It's about the perfectionist at play when you're trying to get that exactly the way you want to sound.
Right.
And for a perfectionist, you can really achieve wonders. But if you're not a perfectionist, if you drive your energy, from energy, period, from the energy of being on stage and working off each other and sort of being sort of spontaneous in what you do, then live is going to be your element.
Yeah.
You just made my chemistry versus cooking argument right there.
Oh, there you go.
And if I'm not mistaken, Gus 6 was a split
Two
decision.
metaphors meet and have babies.
But let's hop back into the album. So track 7,
Raf Stromer.
This is the one which I'm least... Rafstromer,
Which means...
I didn't even try with this one. Oh, that's more Germanic.
this is track 7.
This means electric current.
Interesting.
This was a lot more approachable
It had this
as far as the sound goes because it was very familiar.
It had this kind of sweeping sound that was very engaging.
Yeah, it was very...
Sweeping sound.
A lot more simplistic in its ideas. It was very much listenable.
Very much listenable.
Well,
I hate all these terminology.
No,
I'm going to go with the emotion here, and I'm just going to say it sounds content.
We talked about some ambient music, and either you love it or you hate it. It's really hard to find middle ground.
All right.
Because this is the middle ground. Because of that, it lacks greatly in its quality.
It lacks depth, right?
Yeah.
Because there's something about being content which isn't very engaged. I mean, yes, all right, everyone wants to be content, but even when you're content, you want to accentuate the happiness there. Usually with something a little bit more energetic, like
Right.
for instance what you get in Isyaki. And even to some extent in Stormer. Even Stormer had that going for it. Even though I wasn't completely down with the track itself, it seemed kind of predictable, but it was rousing in a way. You know, even in its innocence. But this was just content. This was just there was very little. There was no hook.
It was baseline.
Baseline. Yeah, I mean,
For them,
it was.
It's in this album. Yeah.
Also, maybe it's the fact that they blended that with the sameness of the brimstone type instrumentation. It's like they did try to merge the two sides there.
And also, after the fact, looking at the last two tracks, like this one just still doesn't hold up. The last two tracks are so much better than this track because there's so much more to them, or at least some intricacies that make them stand out enough.
Amidst my defense, I think it's just the fact that the noise rock element had officially turned the tide for me with this track.
Yeah,
it officially became there's too much clutter to
static.
To incite anything.
Yeah, it just wasn't good enough, honestly.
I can't say good. Like it's still good. It's just
Wasn't great enough.
It's not inspiring.
Yeah, it wasn't great enough then.
Well,
It
clearly
wasn't
we
that
don't have that
next
much to say about this track.
So let's move on to something unpronounceable. So I'm not even going to try.
Blaprather. We'll try. We'll go with that.
Fair enough. Track 8.
This one means thin thread.
So
I like it now.
the defining thing about this song, and
We have a thing here,
and you hear it pretty much from the beginning of the song, is a very interesting drum line. The stutter drum beat of this song is very different.
It starts
kind of Doppler effect running away from us that the percussion is setting up, the synth percussion, is just really intriguing.
It's part of that Doppler effect, and it also occurs with like the second section of the song when we move into this it's sort of a chorus, if you could really call it a chorus, section B or C, whatever you want to call it. It's it's sort of defined to me by the percussion in the background, which just it sort of follows a little bit of a round, and it's sort of this hemiola, which is that ratio of 3 to 2, where you get that there's a beat on the second beat, and then a beat on the first beat, and then a beat on the fourth beat. And by the time you get to the third measure, you're repeating that cycle. Second beat, first beat, fourth beat. And on each and every beat, you have this little 16th note rapid fire, wait. It's kind of a cool effect.
It was a really cool effect also because
it's almost simple, but you notice it after a while, and it keeps you
engaged.
It is the hook. In this case, the percussion takes the hook.
And it's like it was almost a marching beat, but because of that stutter and that quick it kind of engaged you and pulled you forward even more so.
This
was like a transition from menacing into marching in this track.
Yes.
And this was coupled with a sweeping rising and falling guitar that was sine wave style, going up and down and just raising you up, bringing you back. And strings with some of the longest notes we've heard on this album.
Yeah.
It was an incredible effect of fast, mid, and slow that was all brought together, all maintained together with the vocal work, and it was an incredible accomplishment.
Yeah, this was actually a very well-rounded track when I think of all that it had accomplished. Even the band comes in to help sing the chorus for the first time, to join the lead singer,
which sounded
very
lovely.
Nice effect.
That
makes this more of an anthem than the previous ones that I mentioned had an anthem style.
Yeah.
And then, on the same note, you balance that anthem with when you go to the transitions. It's really mellow. Like, actually, especially toward the outro again. You have outro is almost the best parts in this album. Yeah. And it's so mellow, it's like someone's laying you down to sleep. Yeah. Either that or laying you on your deathbed. And that has a very, bit of a
darker tone that this album has had sprinkled through it.
Exactly, but this defines it a lot better than other tracks.
My biggest problem, I think, with the album as a whole, and we can get into this a little bit now before we wrap up with the last track. Yes, I agree that it's great that the outros are so good. However, I also don't like that the outros are so good comparatively to the rest of the track.
I agree.
I think that I shouldn't have to wait till the end of a song to be penultimately engaged.
You know how it's like when we talk about certain elements of music, just, if it's the vocals, sure, if it's a particular instrument, if it's the drums, sure, but they tend to come back in these the sections in between sections, the transitions, the intros, the outros, the interludes, all the places that are supposed to fit in between your theme, and they almost function as the narrator to some extent, not really the story itself, and it can be disappointing when you realize that you like the narrator's voice better than the story he's telling.
Yeah.
And I felt that with the sections
Absolutely.
where the brass comes in. It's like, I loved the brass, and I didn't get as much of it on this album.
And it was almost fleeting in some places.
I was very optimistic when I talked about that in the beginning of this review, but when I think about it, it doesn't come back as often as I think.
It hurts this record. It really does.
And that should have been the album's soul. That should have been part of the story internally. On
a very basic level, it's comparing it to that Robbie Williams thing that we were talking about, where you bring in this flair during the song and do nothing with it. They're bringing in this great thing at the end. Even though the rest of the song is good, bringing in the best at the end...
It's a little bit like that. I won't say it's so divorced as if like a courtesy. In fact, the only thing that I think is comparable to what you're talking about is that piano courtesy.
Yes.
The piano in the entry.
Right, that's the most extreme point of it. But it's like waiting to the end of the song for it to hit its high. I mean, there's nothing really wrong with that, I guess, but it's just, it seems kind of fleeting in some of the songs.
At the same time, I also want to defend the art of it. It is probably, it's a result of their ambient side.
Yeah.
Where... even though they're post-rock, they're not like a lot of other post-rock bands, which really, they try to maintain the verse-chorus, or at least maintain their sections.
Of it.
That's the wrong way to put it, because it's not like this band is divorcing that. There are definable sections throughout this album. The problem is, it doesn't feel like they're as invested in those sections.
Yeah.
They treat those sections as ambient music.
Yeah.
It's like if you carved up ambient music and just made certain sections slightly more prominent than others. And in this case, that's what they're doing. And
speaking of ambient music, let's get into the final track on the album, VAR, V-A-R.
Which means was or shelter. It actually has two separate meanings.
And so this song starts with a very strong piano intro that's got that haunting ambience that you kind of expect from the post-rock that I've heard about. And it seems like something that's kind of always there.
Well, first let's perfect. Talk... No, it's perfect for the voice.
I agree.
Yes,
I do.
Couples with the voice, beautiful.
We'll get to that in a second. First, I just want to discuss theme here. When you consider all the track names that we've gone through here, you get all these images of violent acts of nature, the storm, the brimstone.
I have an explanation.
Okay.
I'm going to do
probably mine too, but sure,
I'm going to do my explanation. This album is this is the history of Iceland. At its core, Brimstone, track one, I'm going to use their English names to better explain it. Brimstone is the tumultuous creation of... Tumultuous creation of the island, with its heavier beast and discord and kind of erupting feel it has. Obsidian is that steady cooling down phase with the hard edges not quite off yet. It's the most basic rock. Iceberg is the shaping. It's got those high vocals, but with a very deep percussion that has a contrasting core nature of solidity, yet outside edges.
It's true, we do owe most of our geography to the Ice Age, the way it carved up everything, the way it is now.
Track 4, Surface, is that smooth finalization of the island, of this homeland. Storm is people showing up, being thrown here, being forced to live here. Candlewick, or Fuse, is the taming, which is why it harkens back to Brimstone. It is the people fighting with this new home that they have, with Iceland. Electric Current is the tamed world. It is their society building up on itself. Thin Thread is their connection in a variety of ways to the outside. And Voss /Shelter is home.
A settling.
I'm very impressed.
Yeah,
by how you took that all together. I probably would have stumbled through that a lot. I'm glad you've been keeping tabs.
Yeah.
So
it's a very solid explanation.
If you're correct, I'll owe you a Coke.
I mean, the reality of it is also we have no language to back this up with, other than the glimpses of what we've been able to piece together. So we can.
We omitted looking at reading the lyrics for this particular album because, of course, there is a translation. But they don't go in Hopelandic. This is not their made-up language. This album happens to be all in their native Icelandic. But when you're listening as a foreigner, we try to treat it as the way most foreign albums would appear when they crossed seas, which, of course, you have to take it at face value.
Yes.
And if you don't understand the language, then the music has to uphold that.
I mean, on the most superficial level, most people didn't know what Gangnam Style meant until months after the song had fizzled out, because you bothered to look it up. I mean, it essentially is equated to a...
I don't even remember.
It's essentially equated to a Beverly Hills kind of style. It's the same idea, this posh living style, which is why the video is so ridiculous.
Oh, wow, that all clicked.
Amazing how it clicks, right? And just like the way John read that through, and it seems to all click.
It
because
makes
I hear that
perfect
in
sense.
every single
Absolutely.
track here.
And if that's what they're going for, it honestly gives it almost as strong of a theme as Paper Chase.
And
it really does.
I was pretty close in my imagination of it, especially considering the theme work of Var, which is what we'll close on here. It is home. It is. You feel like you've gone through all this strife, and then you're finally left with your native Iceland.
It's honestly a beautiful, culminating track that really brings you in, and And
also, I will pull the trope from the piano and the geologic.
okay.
I will pull that in this case because of the way it's stated.
This
is not thrown in at the end of a pop track for no apparent reason.
This fits the track.
This does
it wouldn't be complete without something like that, I feel.
Yeah.
That ambient, almost haunting feeling of settling.
I mean, although when you consider, the storm of people settling here, actually John almost puts it in perspective.
Yeah.
The piano at the end of Storm, people settle, and as soon as people come here, they have to make it home. That's their only recourse.
Yeah.
It's the first night you're there, it needs to be your home, because you're going to be there the rest of your life. So, it does make sense in context. Still, musically speaking, I still think it was a little bit of a courtesy for the end of Storm.
Right, and I mean, theme, we've said before, theme doesn't always forgive quality or sound or composition.
Right.
Now,
but it does strengthen this album a lot.
Var is also a waltz. Very, very slow waltz. It's very... just something to point out. It almost makes it seem even homelier than that, because it's, have fun.
And while haunting is still a very good word to use for Var, you can also say things like comforting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, also the haunting comes from...
It's a slight creep, but it's still got a very heavy, warm blanket kind of a feel to it.
It's because of the slow bowing on the strings that achieves that.
But I'll say the haunting lens, too, when talking about Shelter, this is almost the first day of the rest of your life. That's a big deal and kind of a little scary, so it should be a little haunting.
Kinda? You know how many romantic comedies have ended with first day of the rest of your life that was only bittersweet?
Yeah, so it's
or
just...
musicals, I'm gonna make it, boy, I'm gonna make it.
But that's it. So that hauntingness
oh, God.
adds to that kind of feeling.
Yeah.
And I think really solidifies
it's really appropriate.
Alright, so let's start to wrap this up. So
I'll go first.
Yeah, I was going to say, John, since you have such a clear vision of the theme, why don't you get us going?
Yeah, Mr. Smart Guy.
To some extent, it's a concept album for the world. I mean, it's all about creation and the taming of Iceland, I guess. We really can't go into too much in the actual theme if the...
Just
if
to interrupt
vocals...
really briefly, also, your analysis of the theme of the album really lends to your scientific argument.
Yeah.
It really
thank
does.
you.
Yeah, don't
Thank you.
Don't it though?
So anyway,
And the whole thing is, you guys did half the talking for me on me making these connections. We don't have the lyrics to back it up, but there's just, I feel these emotions flowing through it that really give it an incredible concept. That being said, it's not 100%. It's not even close to 100%. Tracks 5, 6, to some extent 7, and to some extent 4, right there, 4, 5, 6, 7. They're good. They do have a lot of complexity to them. They fall a little bit flat compared to the higher end that we're working with here. It just didn't really do it enough for me to really throw it up into the above 4 range.
and also keep in mind, when you have 3 to 4 tracks on a 9-track album that don't really hook you that well, that's a big difference.
They were also the shorter tracks, though.
Yeah, that's true.
They just didn't go through those same sort of...
There's less for me that really didn't grab me.
Right, but
But it's those 4 that really are the sore thumbs for me. Now, conceptually, beautiful idea. Presentation, not 100%, not adequate. I'm going to make comparison to Boards of Canada because they're the other ambient sound we did. Now, Boards of Canada...
That I brought.
Yeah. Well,
shocking.
I'm sorry, I prefer rock and roll. Boards of Canada
You
was...
kids and your crazy music.
Quiet, Grandpa.
From the first chords, Boards of Canada was just gripping in its complexity.
Yeah, it was ridiculous.
There was so much going on, and it wasn't just that. There was heavy theme work, and they were shorter. They were more contained. Because of that, while...
It's a concise statement because the composition was a lot thinner in Boards of Canada. It's like they didn't need to try, to achieve that end.
I found it to be more intimidating at the same point because of how grand the ideas they were presenting. While this one doesn't have a grand nature per track, it is grand in full album. It's good. It's really good. It's still not even a 4. 3.75. It's really above the rest, but it's got some lacking elements that make up too much of it.
For me, so I'll go out right here and say from the beginning, it's not really my tastes. I didn't dislike it, but I wouldn't go out of my way to listen to this. That being said, up front, also, on the first listen, I had a lot of trouble clarifying my emotional connection to it. Again, lyrics really can help a lot with emotion. As we spoke about in Hymn, some of the songs sounded very romantic, but the lyrics were anything but. So, I felt a little lost. On the second listen, I was able to kind of focus, and us talking it out helped me focus on it also. However, I did like it. On a second listen, the first track, Brimstone, because I'm not going to bother pronouncing the Icelandic versions, because I'm a tool.
Didn't have to say it.
Exactly, I said it for you. It was really engaging. It really pulled me in. And I don't really think I got that feeling again after track 3. There were moments on the last couple of tracks where I did get it, but the beginning started so strong, and then the middle kind of wasn't bad. I agree with John, and I don't even think I'm as harsh on it as John is, but it just didn't live up to what I wanted, based on what I was hearing early on. However, I will say, the theme is very strong on this. Probably the strongest theme we've had since Paper Chase.
You're welcome.
However, that's also not enough
We've
for
had
me.
strong themes since Paper Chase.
Well, but I'm saying this, I think, is closest to Paper Chase for me. Just because the way John described it really kind of works almost perfectly, especially based on how we listened to it and how it sounded. I really love the single. This is one of those cases where the 2 singles are the tracks I really like, and that doesn't happen a lot. But when the singles are my favorite tracks, to me that's a negative on a record. Because if the singles are the best tracks to me, why the hell would I buy the record or listen to it, you know? And that's not their fault. Again, it's a little out of my taste range, but it hurts it for me. Because, when the singles are the strongest tracks, for me, it pulls it down. So, that being said, I think I'm in the same vein as John. I think I'll bump it a little bit and pull a Steve and say, I'll give it a 3.9. It's not 4, but it's not 3.75 either. It's a 3.9. If those outros were elongated and more part of the song and they did more with the rest of the song in the vein of those outros, I might have liked it more. But that's also more to personal taste.
Yeah.
So 3.9 for me.
Very interesting. You know, the gap between 3.5 and 4 is actually really wide.
Yeah.
The more I think about it.
That's why I went right in the middle.
Yeah. Well, we've said that the earlier...
The 3 to 4 range is the most...
is the vastest, because 1 to 3 is almost pittance compared to 3 to 4 and then 4 to 5, which is even larger.
One of the 3. You can do music. Yay. Good for you.
Pretty much.
Okay.
That's actually a good way to put it. 1 to 3, you can do music. Yay. I like that.
There you go.
Anyway.
Shake that top.
Let's get into your review, Steve. Go for it.
All right. Well, I'm going to go out and say I can't really say that this is my taste, or I don't even want taste to enter into it, really. Because, like, you know, taste can be kind of broad even within the ever so vague areas of ambient music and post-rock.
Right.
So, even as soon as I picked this up, I wasn't entirely sure what I was going to get. I am a fan of older Sigur Rós, but even then, it would sometimes be a chore to listen to it on an album scale. I like engagement. And it's not... this might have even been a little bit more engaging than their previous work, but just as John was saying about Boards of Canada, it wasn't as thin, it wasn't as concise. I can't say that it was as organized, as true to the original meaning, you know, as some of those. So, when it comes to this, I'm not as negative on as many songs as you guys. But it's true that there's a few which I have issues with. I'm not 100% on board with, like, most of the tracks in this album. The one that I'm really not on board with is Rap Straumer. I just don't think that it was a very, I just don't think it contributed much to this album at all. The rest all contributed something. I'm positive of that. But I don't think that they flushed them out to their full potential, in my opinion. Some did. I'm down with Brimstone. I actually love Hraftina. The second track is one of my favorites. Isiaki is a wonderful single, and I'm still very defensive for. So actually, this is very early album heavy for me. But by the end, there is definitely a sameness. There's that noise rock feel. It just kind of blends together after a while. You're looking for something to grab you out of the darkness, and it doesn't really do that with full force until Var, the last track.
Bless Prov third.
Track 8.
Oh yeah, track 8 does. I mean, it's even that is almost like a summation of all the good parts. Mm-hmm. It's not as, you know, here's a really, really new thing. So but also because of the theme, because of the theme work that John describes, it is a fully formed idea. Even the throwaways still sort of fit that. I think just on potential alone, I know that this could have been flushed out into so much more. For that reason, I am going to put it just behind. I'm going to put exactly where you put it, Matt. 3.9. This is just shy of a 4. It needed a little bit more of a full, filled out idea, if that makes sense.
And I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that we can all agree that it just had it just fell a little short. For an overall wrap up, I'd say definitely listen to it. If you're a Sigur Rós fan, buy it. If you're anybody else, listen to it. Don't miss this, because it's still worth hearing, hands down. But this is right in the middle. This is a listen. Its ultimate review wrapped up. Listen to it. You know, definitely check it out. Don't miss it.
Yeah.
If you're a fan of post rock and ambient, hopefully both, then yes, this will be right up your alley.
Yeah.
But, I think it's the variety work that gets worked into here, that the different noises, different sounds, different takes. There's a little bit of pop, a little bit of rock and roll, a little bit of industrial. There's a couple of different themes working here.
Yeah, subtle variations. You know, when it really comes down to it, this is, I think we ended up rating this a lot more scrutinizing the artistic side, I think. Because it did seem to promote John's theory that all the scientific components were there, but you didn't always feel, you know, the resounding art.
Yeah.
In every single statement, in every single phrase. It really only occurred in glimpses. The rest is just a backdrop.
And speaking of art, and speaking of everything that's been going on the last couple weeks, I've had part of an old man moment recently. I'm getting frustrated with social media when I go on social media and all I see is people complaining about Ben Affleck playing Batman, which I just don't care, and Miley Cyrus. I'm not saying that the issues that are brought up aren't important. I mean, yes, there were a lot of racist, harsh stuff that happened with the Miley Cyrus performance, but we're not getting into that. I refuse. However,
it's not important.
Music used to mean so much more, and even when I was still in school and getting out of school, there was a lot of talking of cutting funding of music. And I'll be the first to say that I want to talk a little bit about how music is important to me and how important it is in education. Music breeds creativity, and creativity breeds intelligence. It's very difficult to be intellectual without being creative. You can have one without the other, but they bleed together so well, and it's just so dumb to cut funding to that kind of a thing.
And also, when you read about artists who have accomplished great things, it often is because of some kind of exposure. It rarely occurs that there's just the spontaneous burst of creativity when you don't have anyone to talk to about it, anyone to teach you, anyone to guide you, or to inspire you. If you don't have that in your life, then it will probably not happen.
My biggest problem with the music industry today is so much of it, like the entertainment industry and like movies and TV, is it's become more about being famous than being talented. And listening to music at a young age, I mean, first of all, just watching my own nephew and niece grow up, we introduced them to so much music when they were younger, and of course it's music geared towards kids, but it's not just sounds and lights. It was stuff that's still supposed to get them moving, get them up and dancing, get them thinking.
I think it's because a lot of kids, you have to rely on school. It's your only outlet in many ways. Because we can't expect every single parent to be in the creative professions. Some parents have, day jobs, white collar, blue collar, things that don't permit them to always be on the cutting edge of everything creative. But yet they still want that for their child. So if they can't get it,
wants that for their child.
Exactly. If you can't get that at home, then hopefully there's some other way to get it.
Right.
Why should you always have to shell out a lot of money for independent one-on-one teachers when the public school should at least offer something, a spark?
And the problem is that our education system, at least in the United States, is geared towards fact repetition, not towards critical thinking. The best component in creativity is the ability to think critically, to actually question things. This is a major part of the creation of all forms of art, especially music. You have to be able to think outside the box. You take a beat, you start going bump, bump. What you do with that from there is outside the norm.
I mean, this takes us back to that Vsauce video that we watched ages ago. Will we ever run out of music?
That's right.
And it's like, you can do so much with the basics and still make something no one's ever heard before. But it requires creativity.
You remember, I know both of you have seen it, the acapella 8-bit video from that high school, where they're doing all this mashup of...
high school?
No, from a high school. They were doing a mashup of, Super Mario Brothers, Legend of Zelda.
But they were all
Mortal
singing
Kombat.
it.
They were doing it full acapella. It was a great idea. You've seen plenty of drum lines from college doing,
No, I've seen acapella.
Legend of Zelda.
Yeah, in college, our
amazing
acapella
things.
group did great things.
They're combining old school video games with the flair of what schools are producing musically. And that brings me to another thing. I love drum lines. I love big bands that you get at, Notre Dame game.
Well, it instills the sense of rhythm. If you have no other source for sense of rhythm, that's one thing that I shouldn't always cross over. You need a creative touch, because some children are intuitively rhythmic. That can sometimes come just straight from the woodwork. You can't always plan that kind of thing.
Right.
But for sure, a band line will help facilitate that. If you're forced to keep in time for a while, you're not going to be able to miss it. You're not going to be able to avoid keeping in time, which is a necessary thing for most musical effects, unless you're doing ambient.
The reason I bring these things up is that while, yes, they're great for a distraction for a couple of minutes because you get to watch them on YouTube, and it's enjoyable, but those kids really thought outside the box. They thought of something. and they took 2 things, 3 things they love, brought it together, and created something. And it's terrible because music programs, among the huge variety of programs, are getting defunded. Everything's getting defunded. But music gets hit incredibly hard.
Well, because our culture, at least in this government, is convinced that the things like science and math are more important than music, and I disagree. They're not. They're all important together. It's it's all or none.
We have quite a large turnout of science and math people who they love science, they love math, they're very good at it, they excel at it. They're having problems in the job market because they don't know how to sell their skill in a manner that has a very niche application. Because sometimes the creative spark, offering the world something that does not exist, as opposed to simply a slot that needs filling, which most of those cases, it's already been filled. If you're going to offer the world something new, you need that creative touch to throw into it, which is why I actually love the Vsauce blog, because most of the videos that guy's done, he throws in a creative spin to every scientific question that he poses. Yeah. And it is inspiring in many ways. It helps you make sense of the world around you and conceive things that you wouldn't previously conceive of.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is more of a discussion, an event than anything else, but, it's just, I want there to be more pressure on music education, because I think that's where we'll get our ultimate creativity sources.
Well, it's true. You said you heard, that this was in discussion going back to the 90s, right? When you were in school. So,
sure.
Yeah, and the discussion persisted into the 2000s, and now I know of several schools where there's no funding for music at all, or art programs, or theater programs, or anything of the sort.
That's because schools specifically geared in the high school and junior high level towards the arts, towards the musics, are becoming the place where you actually go to if you want to be a musician. If you want to learn how to play the sax, you better hope you get into an art school. If you want to be a dancer, you got to hope. And you're not even going to take classes.
Vocational.
And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with specialty schools.
No, there is a problem wrong with those. On the other side,
problem is
they don't teach you science. It becomes only the creative side.
No, I was gonna pose it.
That's not true.
I disagree with that. The thing that I was going to pose is that it requires that you have to know what you're doing early in life. Yeah. Like when you graduate 8th grade, you need to go into a vocational high school. I didn't know what I wanted to do in 8th grade at all. I mean, people, almost every single person I know, has not known what they wanted to do in 8th grade. I mean,
and to limit somebody that way and focus one to the other end, one way or the other, it can hurt them. They're developmentally, especially.
Yeah. I mean, some people... Granted, that there is a flip side to this, and that's that our generation tends to take immensely long time to figure out what you're going to do with your life. And actually, I think we had that discussion many, many weeks ago on the podcast. Like a much earlier episode, we talked about deciding what you want to do, ideally before 30.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we live in a much more complex society. I think that's why we should give this generation a little bit more leeway, not excessively so, but just enough leeway that they should know what exists in the world and know all the possibilities that are out there. The internet speeds things up, but as much as it speeds things up, it also presents more.
More. The amount of consumption we have on a daily basis now is going to slow us down as well as more inform us.
So you can end up picking just one field, and yet there'll still be any bazillion of applications of slots you could fill within that field.
Yeah, at the same time, and it's internet's reason that this has happened. People don't look for the information because, well, it's there. If they need it, they can just look it up. Why should they know things when they have the ability to know it when they need to?
Which we talked about when we did our technology discussion very early on. One
thing that's been going... Sorry to interrupt.
No,
one thing that's
fine.
been going on, I'm seeing, and it's on the comedy websites and the random stuff like that, people don't know that Titanic was real. They thought it was a movie. How stupid are you? And I don't care. I don't care. If you did not know that, if you go, oh my gosh, someone just told me you're a moron and should be drummed out of our society and meant to live on an island with the rest of them. Because
We do not all hold John's views.
I don't care. I judge people.
Fair enough.
And the reason
Fair
I
enough.
judge people is because I have expectations.
Of course, we should all have expectations, but at the same time, where should most of that come from? That's a simple historical event. Where should that come from? The school system.
Yes.
Every single school system should
But at the
cover
same
certain
time,
things like that.
People who know things, who understand things to such a degree, but lack the adaptability, the creativity, and the critical thinking to actually expand upon it and to take what they know and, try to understand it on a deeper level. Like someone knows, we're doing this, or gasoline is going to run out. But nobody thinks, well, what happens when gasoline runs out? And that's that creative flair. What do you do to try to solve a problem like that? If you can't think like that, that's another problem I have. That is not meeting my expectations.
But in closing, more or less, I mean, the thing that I really want to get into...
Well, we ain't closing yet.
We ain't closing.
I got more to vent.
Well, I mean...
You vented. I didn't vent.
So then talk. I mean, where are we going with this?
Well,
It's
first of
a
all,
compilation.
First of all, I wanted to talk about something you were saying, John. That when it comes to, a mention like that, the Titanic, that's a simple historical event. Obviously, the school should teach it. And yet, the fact that that particular case, and yes, we do find them online and in blogs altogether where someone will post, I thought that was a movie. Well, you really think that that's because the school didn't teach the Titanic, or because they weren't paying attention? Because you could say the same thing, just to play devil's advocate for a minute, you could say the same thing for a lot of music, classes in school, either the band or the orchestra at school. I can tell you straight out that for every one devoted first chair student in an orchestra or a band, there are so many others where it's just a place to sit and dick around.
Well, and that's the thing I wanted to bring up also, actually.
And just try to fake it while,
That's what I want to bring up. Like, in my high school chorus class, taking chorus was an excuse to hang out with girls and not have to do any work.
And the reason for that is because music... I took art. I didn't take music. I took music appreciation for a semester. But I took a lot of art-oriented classes.
Did you appreciate it?
I actually did, because of the way the class was set up.
Yeah.
It wasn't what you see as a standard music system in first, second, third grade, where you're going to learn this is a one note, this is another note, as I mime a trumpet. You're just learning facts in that case. You're not actually learning music. You're learning how to reproduce music, but that's not learning music.
Well, but yet it was called music appreciation. You'd think with something called music appreciation, you should be listening to a lot of music. Did they play
understanding
excerpts?
it. It's once again the regurgitation of facts. Except in this case,
well, I'm not
it's auditory.
anti-fact, because everyone should know, if you're going into the music profession, well, even if you're not going into the music profession, you should know what exists in the music.
Yeah.
You should know the capabilities of music. You should know all the different types. And yet, lost my train of thought. When it comes to that music appreciation, you need to be exposed. I think that's first and foremost, is that a lot of music classes, hopefully they have funding for music classes, and if you have funding, they can't just, as John said, regurgitate or direct with the idea that the student should know what he's doing, because I think this is also how we breed a generation of students to sort of disassociate themselves from music when they recall their band or high school or middle school orchestra days, and they just think, I didn't know what was going on. The teacher was just moving his hand, waving it in the air, and I didn't know what the hell that meant. Because, let's face it, there are a lot of students in the classroom. It's difficult to tackle a classroom and teach each and every single one of them, but I do think the time should be set aside. And it isn't always set aside.
But
a
also,
lot of times, it's just conduct and pray that they can reproduce this sheet music you're handing
But also,
out.
we can't also clearly just blame the schools. I mean, when funding's being pulled, yes, that's a problem, but also parents are just as important. You need to every parent should sit down with their kid after school and go over what they've learned, what they're learning, what
But
they're
funding
going.
doesn't always affect that, and this is why I'm getting the devil's advocate side here. Funding does not affect that manner of teaching.
But that's what
There's no funding that goes into
Right.
the way you choose to teach your class. The only funding that you need, really, is just upkeep of the instruments.
But I'm also saying it doesn't just fall on the teachers and the funding. It falls on the parents as well. Parents have to make these things, these staples, important. Because if you're raising your child, your environment is settling them to where they're going to be and where they're going to end up. And if you don't make music important to a child at a young age, they'll never think it's important. Or they'll find it important a different way. But having a strong family base and parenting base also helps that.
I think that comes down to is you shouldn't write your child's future, before they're born.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of parents do that. They're like, oh, he's probably going to, I want him to go in the science and math field. He'll go in the science and math field. Or maybe it'll be only music. Maybe you'll have an obsessive music parent who says, no, my child's going to be a better musician than I am, or play right alongside me. And you need to leave room for the other things. This is the age of free will. Almost extreme free will, super free will. So much that you can't run away from it. And you need to let the child flourish. That means exposure to a variety of things, and that's, I think, how you produce the most educated child, period, is by introducing them to a little bit of everything.
I mean,
and keep a keen eye on every single thing that he's enjoying, or seems to have a knack for, or a talent for, and then facilitate that further.
And listen to them when they're talking, what they're telling you, what they like and what they don't like.
Yeah, you divide it into physical and the mental.
Right.
And a healthy person does both. A healthy person will be active in some sort of way, whether they play sports or they jog or whatever. Just something that gives your body a chance to be different and creative. And the other aspect is mental. Whether it's a writer, musician, or someone who's just extremely good at manipulating numbers. A statistician can be creative.
Well, that's all true. I agree with all that. At the same time, I'm just going to go right back to playing devil's advocate. You wonder why schools are cutting funding. Could it be for that reason, that they expect that kind of stuff to fall under the parents? Not every parent is a qualified professor in everything, but they know where to set. They should be alert to the kind of things that a child is good at, and then facilitate a one-on-one relationship.
Yeah, but you should,
where they can be a little bit more, because you're not going to get that in a school. You will never get a one-on-one relationship in a school unless you have a phenomenal music professor.
Yes, but it's not the parent's job to give an introduction. That's the school's job. The parent's job is to facilitate the next step.
Yes.
But the basic learning of math, science, and music, and English, all of these subjects, the groundwork is the job of the schools, because they can mass produce that.
If you want kids to learn, whether it's on the arts or the sciences, you have to be able to connect the facts that they're learning to them, the real life, something. You could teach everybody in the world trigonometry. Nobody's going to use it unless they understand what trigonometry is good for. You can teach them about the history and when Columbus sailed. What's it good for? Show them what it is actually good for.
On a whole, what this education system is lacking
demystify the subject, I think, is what it's all about.
Give it a real-world application.
Another reason why the generation become disassociated from certain subjects. If it's too mysterious to them, they won't delve.
My favorite classes were not the ones I was best in. They were the ones that had the most entertaining teachers. Not even subject-wise. Subject could be dry. Chemistry, very dry subject. Loved my high school chemistry teacher because he was great. He got us involved. I remember one time he was teaching us about, I don't even remember, all the difference between a chemical bond and just putting stuff together. He took his hand, he shoved it in a group of thumbtacks, and was bleeding, and all these little things were stuck in his hand. And it was engaging. Like, instantly, oh my god, he's bleeding. That's how he gripped us. He showed us something we never seen before. And from that moment on, that was the second day of class, I was paying attention. I was there every moment because he was just able to relate me to what I was learning.
That's true. And yet I also want to make the distinction between music and a lot of these other subjects, because it's true, entertaining and inspiring students is important. But I do have to give a lot of credit to the music teachers out there, because essentially what you're doing in a music classroom is you're giving every child a toy. And you're expecting them, not to use it as a tool. That's a rough transition. Yeah. Because when you have a hold of this thing that makes noise, it's in child's interest just to sort of play around with it for a while, and that doesn't always mean utilizing it to the best of its capabilities. what you need to do as a music professor is go around one by one. And I'm not even, I'm not disparaging any music professors or music teachers in my past, because I think they all did pretty well. Especially considering some of the students that I recall, which were pretty difficult to deal with. That's what I'm getting at, is that sometimes it's the students who walk into that class. There's a lack of respect these days. I know this is kind of a side point, but it makes it a lot more difficult for a well-minded professor to try and instill something when they're met with such animosity, almost, against the aspect of learning itself, which it seems, and this is where I become an old man, it seems it's more prevalent. Lack of respect for people in authority.
Well, also,
which is why public schools, in my opinion, are getting a little bit too nice.
Well, part of the problem is also, and that's a problem in this country, is teachers, service industry, retail are all treated like they're expected to do these things, not that they're doing a service.
Yeah.
They're looked down on like it's almost like looking at them like they're slaves to these professions, that you're expected to do it, so just do it. I don't have to be nice to you.
There was a politician, and I'm only going to get slightly political here. I want to say this was Hillary Clinton, and for better or for worse, she said this quote, and it could ring true, it could also ring harrowing, that it takes a society to raise a child. On one hand, yes, it does. We're all about exposure, and every single person we come across is going to affect our lives in some way. It's half the parents, it's half the school. At the same time, it will always start with the parents. Almost always start with the parents. In other words, if it doesn't start in the beginning, it's harder to instill later in life. Doesn't mean you shouldn't stop trying, but it's just like what you said, Matt, that you should not put all that weight on the teachers. They can do the best they can, but they can't transform a life in every single circumstance.
Remember a few years ago they changed the SATs to include a written part?
Yes, it went from 1,600 to 2,400.
Nobody knew how to take it, because it was finally introducing our standardized be-all, end-all, are you going to college test. They introduced the ability to write. Not just regurgitating facts. It was finally a creative aspect on a test that was supposedly going to decide your fate. At the same time, when they introduced that, so many schools actually either ignored the writing scores or devalued the actual nature of the SATs as a whole.
What one reason is actually because the writing section was... You're telling me that it was more about facilitating creativity, and that's not what my experience was at all, especially considering the way I did actually have a tutor, the way he described, and several teachers of mine described that test and how I should prepare for it was almost painstakingly formulaic. It didn't facilitate creativity in any degree. It seemed to just be, this is exactly how we want you to write this essay, and if you stray, you will be marked off. And that's not too good, in my opinion. Yeah. Whether you did good or whether you didn't is almost irrelevant. It's like, okay, well, if you can regurgitate, fine. And if you can't, well, maybe not fine, but maybe you're more creative. Who knows?
Yeah, but the SATs as a full function are kind of archaic at this point anyway.
It's standard. It's a city and state standardized test. It's a federal standardized test.
Most people don't even look at that anymore.
Standardized tests have actually gone by the wayside. The most important thing that's going to get you into college
is a degree. Get a college degree.
No, the most important thing that gets you into college.
Oh.
You didn't listen to what I said.
No.
Is extracurricular, meaning music.
Meaning show you're a well-rounded person who has interests and is not a tool of the system.
AKA not the facts you're learning in school.
Well,
is going to
including, but showing interest in the facts in school.
B is going to be your grades. And C is the letter. Is the questionnaire they give you. Is that 2 to 4 trillion word page document you have to write about where do you see yourself in 5 years, or why do you want to go to this college, and all sorts of stuff like that. And that's where the most people fail to get into colleges, because they don't know how to write. Not in an SAT sense, not in a essay sense, but in a way that someone reads and actually gets grit, puts a little check mark that says this person did something different.
I'll tell you this. This is definitely a little bit of a roundabout conversation because we're proposing so many different things that we would like fixed or like more attention focused on, and I'm going to do it just one more time because of something that John just said. When it comes to writing, and considering everything we just said about the SATs and about the letter and the essay that you have to write for college, the fact that many people do not know how to write around the nation, I think, is one of the saddest things, but it comes not just back to creativity, but also to facts. And this is a different critique I have of the system, is the fact that we seem to have not abolished, but really depressed the emphasis on grammar school. The fact that there is a grammar system, and that, barring all types of creativity whatsoever, that comes into play later. You need to have grammar down first. Otherwise, you're going to be taking liberties with the English language, which are premature for the sake of someone else's understanding of it. Like, their digestion of the words that you put on the paper. That's first and foremost, is that you need to make your ideas public. You need to make it so that everyone around you can understand them. That's what's important. That's what defines, people from a lot of other people. If you don't know how to convey, that's a problem. And that goes back to both English and music.
You can use a very simple vocabulary, yet be deep enough. But if you can know all the words in the world, and if you don't know how to use them, you're like me.
Yes. So now that we've gotten so fantastically tangential...
No, this isn't tangential. This is all leading back to the basic idea of...
It's education.
We should fund better creation in our schools.
The reality and wrap-up of this is music is important, but reality of it is everything is important and should be treated as equal.
Liberal arts should actually be artistic.
Yes.
That's what I think it boils down to.
Yes, absolutely. And that we need to pay more attention to this stuff because we're building the future of this planet and this country, and it's kind of dismal on the greater outlook.
I'm kind of.
We started off on a creative note, and yet I kind of concluded on a bit of a formulaic mathematical note when it comes to grammar. But
it's true.
Structure is a foundation. Creativity is the icing on the cake, and that is what will make you an individual.
I'm kind of curious as to what the follow-up to the conceptual idea of VAR would be in the next Icelandic, Hopelandic monstrosity of post-rock.
On that note,
Sigur Rós' brand of.
I really need to laugh. So, Steve, can you hit us with our latest spam mail?
Oh, spam! It's spam time. All the saddest job involving hoarding is usually that the affected person can often be towards practically alterations in and also able to quit on or their loved ones, friends, and family at the same time, any contentment in the, or perhaps stuff. Microwave ovens, particularly the infrared ranges, are matched to the gain of rayonment to prepare things to eat while in the on-your-oven area. The most important, because usually, and the baking charter yacht throughout the new wave stove tops turbo compressor, the oven is produced with plastic, (vanity). The entire high price, then far more teppanyaki barbecue grills are perfect implementing to you when you are going by smaller excursions absent. By toasterovenpicks.com.
There was a disconnect somewhere, and I missed the transition. This A to B didn't work at all.
Really? Because as far as my lungs are concerned, there was no disconnect. It was one big thing.
No, I'm seeing it's more like a round than anything else.
Oh yeah, like it repeats itself, and then more sections are introduced when it repeats.
Yeah, no, it starts with the section.
Just stop. Just stop.
About stuffs and restates it as the microwave oven, and eventually becoming the turbo compressor oven.
And there was a theme there.
There was a theme.
I
felt the theme.
I refuse to musically break down the spam email. I refuse. Shut up.
The baseline preposition
ToasterOvensPicks.com would be very displeased by your...
I don't care.
The baseline preposition work was just terrible, though.
Anyway, on that note, let's get to next week. So next week is my pick, and I'm deciding to go with something that, I don't think any of my co-hosts are happy with. We're going to do the new Nine Inch Nails record called Hesitation Marks. It's their first record in a while. Trent Reznor took a break.
Hesitation Marks?
Yep.
like question marks and exclamation marks. Well, this is hesitation marks.
Yes.
I see.
Is that an ellipsis?
That's exactly what it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they could have
he-
saved themselves letters.
Anyway, Trent Reznor taking a break from being Nine Inch Nails to do solo composition for Social Network and Black Ops and a bunch of other video games and movies to
All
do.
them other medias.
Yeah, he's done other stuff. But I mean, since Nine Inch Nails is pretty much just Trent Reznor, he does all the writing and performing in the studio. He only has a live band to do everything else. It should be interesting. I mean, I honestly don't foresee it being very different from his past work. So we'll see. But that's my pick for next week. We've got Painless Parker coming up at the end of the month, which I'm excited about. Is that it? We good? Can we wrap it up and go home?
You are home.
That's true.
That's true. You're very
Yes.
much home.
Anyway, on that note, music is life, and life is good.